I never imagined love could feel like both a refuge and a trap, but that was Clara. She walked into my life like a storm I didn't see coming, beautiful and chaotic, leaving traces of fire in her wake. Looking back now, I realize I should have run the moment I met her. But instead I fell, hard, completely, irrevocably, and with every step the ground beneath me cracked a little more. Our first encounter was at a gallery opening downtown. I had gone reluctantly, trying to appease a friend who insisted I needed culture. Clara was leaning against a sculpture, glass of wine in hand, laughing at something one of the artists had said. She wasn't the center of attention, but she drew my eyes like gravity. There was a sharpness to her gaze, a subtle defiance, and an edge of vulnerability that whispered promises I didn't yet understand. I found myself walking toward her before I even realized I wanted to. "Do you always critique strangers' work like that?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my heart was hammering. She glanced at me, eyebrows raised, a smirk playing at the corners of her mouth. "Only when it's worth noticing," she replied, her voice smooth, confident, yet tinged with mischief. And just like that, I was hooked. We talked for hours, wandering through the gallery's dimly lit rooms, discussing art, philosophy, life, and secrets I hadn't shared with anyone. There was an intensity in her questions, a depth I wasn't prepared for. She had a way of cutting through pretense, forcing you to confront the parts of yourself you usually kept hidden. By the time we left, I felt exposed, exhilarated, and completely under her spell. That night we walked along rain-slicked streets, her hand brushing mine, and I felt the pull of a connection so electric it was almost painful. We didn't kiss, didn't make promises. There was no grand declaration, no whispered vows, just the quiet intimacy of two people teetering on the edge of something dangerous. I should have recognized the warning signs. Clara wasn't the kind of woman who gave herself fully. She offered glimpses, fragments, and moments of tenderness that felt monumental, only to vanish before you could grasp them. Her life was full of gaps I was never allowed to explore, nights she couldn't explain, absences I couldn't account for. And yet I stayed. Foolishly, relentlessly, hopelessly. In the following weeks, our relationship unfolded in a series of highs and lows that left me dizzy. Days of laughter and closeness were punctuated by nights when she disappeared, leaving vague excuses and empty promises. Her phone buzzed constantly, messages I was never allowed to see. I tried to trust her to accept her silences, but the unease was always there, simmering beneath the surface. Then came the first major crack. I had returned from work earlier than expected one evening, planning a surprise dinner. Her apartment was dark, no response to my knocks. The faint glow of her phone slipped from under the couch, and the sound of hushed voices drifted through the thin walls. I froze, stomach twisting, heart pounding. A man's laugh, light and intimate, intertwined with her own. I didn't confront her. I didn't shout or demand an explanation. I walked away quietly, each step heavier than the last, my chest tight with disbelief. On the street, under the flickering glow of a lamppost, I realized something horrifying. I wasn't just in love with Clara. I was addicted to her. To her presence, her chaos, her lies, her fire. And that addiction made it impossible to leave, no matter how clearly she had betrayed me. In the days that followed, I tried to reason with myself. I told myself love required patience, understanding, and sometimes blindness to imperfection. I told myself her absences and secrets were minor, temporary flaws, but deep down I knew the truth. She was dangerous. And yet, despite every warning, I kept reaching for her, drawn into the storm she represented. By the time the first month passed, I was no longer just infatuated. I was ensnared, entwined in a web of desire, lies, and fragile trust. Clara had me exactly where she wanted me, and I had no idea how to escape. It was then that I realized this was only the beginning. The true betrayal, the twists that would shatter my world, had not yet arrived. The following weeks became a test of endurance I hadn't expected. Clara's presence was intoxicating, yet maddening, like standing on the edge of a cliff and staring into a stormy sea. Some nights she was warm, affectionate, making me believe I had been imagining the distance between us. Other nights she vanished, leaving only her scent in the apartment, her absence ringing louder than any words could. One evening, I found myself packing her apartment after she went out for a friend's dinner, the kind of vague excuse I had learned to accept. Her phone buzzed continuously on the counter, each vibration a tiny spike of anxiety in my chest. I tried not to look, tried to remind myself that trust was a choice, but the curiosity became unbearable. Sliding the phone just slightly, I glimpsed the name on the screen: Adrian. My stomach dropped. Adrian. I had no idea who he was, but the intimacy in the messages I saw made my hands shake. I shoved the phone back where it belonged, hoping she wouldn't notice, hoping my heart would stop pounding so violently. But the truth had already sunk in. I wasn't the only one. When she returned, smiling and laughing as though nothing had happened, I tried to act normal. "Dinner was nice?" I asked, my voice tight. "Yes," she said lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Why do you sound like something's wrong?" I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead I smiled weakly, nodding. I had already learned that confrontation only fueled her control. Clara didn't apologize. She didn't explain. She simply existed on her terms, and anyone who wanted to be near her had to accept it or leave. Weeks passed and the tension grew unbearable. I caught her in small lies, half-truths that she spun so effortlessly I questioned my own perception. A friend's name that never appeared in conversation, a business meeting that seemed suspiciously long, cryptic messages that disappeared when I wasn't looking. Each revelation was a knife twisting deeper into trust, and still, I clung to her. Then came the weekend she suggested a getaway to a cabin in the woods. I should have refused. I should have realized it was a trap, a test, or simply another distraction. But the thought of being near her, of stealing even a small fragment of intimacy, blinded me. The cabin was isolated, surrounded by trees bare from winter, the air crisp and sharp. Inside, the fireplace glowed, casting flickering shadows across the room. At first, it felt like an escape, a bubble where her lies couldn't reach me. We cooked together, walked through the woods, and shared moments that seemed real, almost sacred. But isolation only amplified the tension. One night, while she slept beside me, her phone buzzed. I saw the name, Adrian. The same intimacy, the same secrets. Even here in our supposed sanctuary, I realized she couldn't and wouldn't give herself to me completely. She existed on a different plane, a world where I was never the center. I confronted her gently the next morning, my hands trembling as I poured coffee. "Who is Adrian?" Her eyes held me captive, unreadable and sharp. For a moment I thought I might see remorse, but no, she smiled faintly, almost amused. "Does it matter?" she asked. "You're still here." Her words were venom dressed as truth. She didn't deny it. She didn't apologize. She simply reminded me that I had no control, no claim, no leverage. I had loved an idea, a version of her that existed only for me. And now I had to face the reality that I had been nothing more than a willing participant in her game. By the end of that trip, I felt hollowed out, reshaped by betrayal and desire. Yet the strangest part was that I couldn't leave entirely. The pull of Clara, her chaos, her fire, was stronger than reason, stronger than pain. And deep down, I knew this was only the beginning. Returning from the cabin didn't make anything easier. If anything, the betrayal had embedded itself deeper into my chest, turning every thought into a battle between desire and despair. Clara moved through her life with the same effortless control, unaware, or maybe fully aware, of the damage she left in her wake. I tried to tell myself that I was strong, that I could detach, but the truth was brutal. I was utterly consumed by her. One evening I followed her, unplanned, driven by a mix of fear and obsession I barely understood. She met a man in a quiet cafe, Adrian. Their interaction was intimate, warm, natural. Watching them, I realized I wasn't jealous in the usual sense. I was devastated, not by his presence, but by how easily she had woven him into her world, a world I had thought I occupied exclusively. When I confronted her later that night, her response was chilling in its simplicity. "You think you understand love," she said softly, eyes glinting with defiance. "You don't. You loved an idea of me, not me. That's the difference." The weight of her words crushed me, yet I stayed. Every instinct screamed to leave, to break free, but the fire she ignited in me, the addictive mixture of pain, desire, and hope, kept me tethered to her. Weeks blurred together, filled with stolen moments and sharp absences. I caught her in more half-truths, trips she didn't explain, messages disappearing when I entered a room, whispered phone calls abruptly ended. The pattern was unmistakable, and yet I remained, addicted to the highs, enduring the lows. Each revelation reshaped me, breaking down my capacity for trust, leaving me raw and vulnerable. Then came Daniel. I didn't know him at first, just a voice on the phone, trembling, desperate. He had discovered Clara's web of lies in a different way, and like me, he had been ensnared. Speaking to him, I realized I wasn't alone. She had ensnared more hearts than I could count, each one a mirror reflecting the manipulation I had suffered. The realization was bitter, but it brought clarity. Clara wasn't malicious in a conventional sense. She wasn't cruel for cruelty's sake. She was untouchable, untamed, existing on her own terms. We were all participants in her design, and no amount of love, loyalty, or suffering could make her belong to anyone. One night, in a confrontation that I hadn't planned but somehow knew would happen, I faced her directly. Her apartment smelled of candle wax and faint perfume, and the city's lights filtered through the blinds. I demanded answers, my chest tight with fury and heartbreak. "Why do you do this?" I asked. Her eyes were steady, piercing. "Because I can," she said. "Because loving someone fully isn't what I do. You loved a version of me I allowed you to see. That's all it was ever going to be." Her honesty was a blade. No excuses, no lies, just the cold reality I had feared. Everything I had felt, everything I had hoped for, was a carefully curated illusion. She had orchestrated it, controlled it, and now she was untouchable, leaving me shattered in her wake. I walked away that night silently, letting the door click behind me. The city streets were cold, the rain falling hard, but I moved through it with a clarity I hadn't known before. I was leaving her, yes, but I was also confronting the reality I had ignored for so long. Love can be intoxicating, but some people aren't meant to be loved in the way we imagine. And as I walked, soaked and shivering, I understood that the final betrayal, the one that would mark the last chapter of our entanglement, was still waiting. After that night, everything changed. Clara didn't apologize, didn't plead, didn't try to reclaim me. She continued to move through her life with effortless grace, smiling at people, attending parties, sending messages that I knew weren't meant for me, while I tried to navigate the wreckage she had left. Her presence was a constant ache, a reminder of everything I had lost and yet still craved. I tried to rebuild my life cautiously at first. I met friends, tried hobbies, even went on a few dates, but every moment was shadowed by her. I'd catch a glimpse of someone in the street and see her face. I'd hear laughter that reminded me of hers. I'd smell perfume in a passing crowd and feel my chest tighten. The addiction hadn't left. It had transformed into something subtler, more insidious. Then came the text that would unearth the last of my illusions. It was from Daniel, a man I'd never met, whose existence I had only glimpsed through fragmented conversations and stories. He had been caught in Clara's orbit as well, and his message was brief, stark. "She's still playing. You're not the only one she's broken." I stared at my phone, feeling the old surge of anger, betrayal, and helplessness. The clarity I had gained began to fracture. How many men had she ensnared? How long had I been living in the shadow of her games? The answer didn't matter. The truth was that I had loved someone untameable, someone who thrived on control and chaos, and there was nothing I could do to change it. I confronted her one last time. Her apartment was quiet, the city lights diffused through the blinds, casting lines across the walls. I stood in the center of the room, every nerve on fire, and asked the question I had been dying to ask. "Clara, why? Why do you do this?" Her eyes met mine, unwavering, filled with an honesty that terrified me. "Because I don't love the way you want me to," she said. "You loved an idea, not me. I gave you what you needed to believe and nothing more." The finality of it hit me harder than any lie ever could. There was no manipulation left, no evasion, no smirk to mask the truth. Clara existed outside the rules, outside attachment, outside the reach of anyone who tried to bind her heart. I had loved her completely, and in return I had been given clarity and devastation. That night I left without looking back. No words, no screams, just footsteps fading into the streets. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, yet it was the only way to preserve what little of myself remained. Every instinct screamed to return, to beg, to plead, but I didn't. I had learned the most painful lesson. Some people are not meant to be owned, tamed, or loved in the ways we hope. Some exist only to show us the limits of our hearts. The weeks after were a haze of memory and longing. I replayed every kiss, every whispered word, every fleeting moment of connection, now poisoned by the knowledge of her deceit. And yet, even in the pain, there was a strange clarity. I had survived her storm, and while I was scarred, I had learned something vital about myself. I thought about Daniel and Adrian, wondering if they too had found the strength to step away, or if they were still trapped in her web. I never reached out. Some lessons are too personal to share, some wounds too deep to explain. Clara's face lingers in my mind sometimes, in reflections, in strangers, in dreams. But I've learned to carry it without collapsing. I've learned to exist beyond her influence, to hold myself as sacred, to cherish the part of me that still believes in love, even after it broke me. And now I understand the cruel beauty of her existence. She taught me the price of devotion, the danger of desire, and the strength required to finally walk away. Leaving Clara wasn't a moment, it was a process, a slow unwinding of my heart from hers. It didn't happen with a slam of a door or a shouted argument. It happened in quiet increments, in the empty apartment, in the streets at night, in the silence between phone calls I didn't answer. Each step forward felt like dragging a weight, a tether I couldn't quite sever, a fire I had learned to fear yet still craved. The months that followed were strange and hollow. I met people, yes, attempted connection, but no one could match the intensity she had drawn from me. Her laughter haunted my mind. Her glance lingered in memory, sharper than any blade. Even in absence, she was omnipresent, a constant reminder of the chaos I had allowed into my life. Yet slowly, I began to reclaim myself. Each day I spent without her in proximity was a small victory, a stitch in the tattered fabric of my self-respect. I wondered often about Adrian and Daniel. Had they managed to escape her orbit as I had? Or were they still bound by the same spell I had felt, tangled in the illusions she wove with terrifying precision? I never reached out, never needed confirmation. Part of me didn't want to know. Part of me knew the pain they carried would mirror mine, and that knowledge was enough to understand the magnitude of her reach. The hardest nights were the ones when I remembered the moments of tenderness, the brief glimpses of warmth, the fleeting smiles, the intimacy that had felt real. Those memories collided violently with the reality of her betrayals, and I often wondered if I had loved her, or just loved the version she allowed me to see. Perhaps it was both. Perhaps that is the cruelest form of manipulation, making someone fall for a person who exists only partially in truth. Eventually, I stopped seeking her in reflections and shadows, stopped turning over every stone, stopped imagining what she was doing, who she was with. The obsession ebbed, replaced with a quiet understanding that some people are not meant to be loved in conventional ways. Clara existed on her own terms, a force untamed and unclaimed, and nothing I could give would ever hold her entirely. In her absence, I found a strange freedom. I learned to breathe without the constant ache of anticipation and betrayal. I learned to love myself in a way I had neglected, to rebuild the pieces of my heart she had shattered. And I realized something profound. Surviving her storm didn't mean forgetting her. It meant understanding her, understanding myself, and reclaiming the life I almost lost to someone who could never be mine. I still carry her with me, her voice in echoes, her smile in flashes, her chaos in the way I approach intimacy and trust. But now it is not a poison. It is a lesson, etched deep in the marrow of my being. The love I felt, the obsession, the heartbreak, it all forged me into someone stronger, more wary, but still capable of care, still capable of hope. Clara taught me the sharp edges of love, the danger of desire, and the fragile limits of trust. She betrayed me, manipulated me, and yet in the aftermath she gave me the one thing I never expected: a mirror. In it, I saw the depths of my own devotion, the vulnerability I had ignored, and the strength I never knew I possessed. I loved her. She broke me. But in the ruins I found myself, and that perhaps was the only victory I truly needed.